you for having me and doing this. I do also want to thank the Mental Health Coalition for this one-to-one series that they've been doing. So every day of May, they're hosting a one-to-one series, and the idea behind it is everyone is struggling with something and hurting, and everyone needs that one person to talk to. So it's one person to talk to someone.
Yeah, yeah, it's really an awesome initiative that they're doing, and really honored to be a part of it. The thing I really noticed as a general theme, I'll tell you a tiny thumbnail background on myself while we're waiting for people to join. I grew up in Alaska. My parents were musicians. My mom left home when I was 8, and my dad took over raising me. My dad was a Vietnam vet. My dad's childhood was wonderful. You know, grew up in Alaska in nature with a lot of really beautiful things. But it was also a really abusive household. So abusive that when my dad went away to Vietnam, he found it relaxing. It tells you a lot about his childhood. And so when my mom left, he started trauma triggering, raising us by himself. He started drinking. That went pretty predictably. He became abusive, and I ended up moving out at 15. And I knew that statistically, kids like me end up repeating the cycle that they were raised by. And I didn't want to be a statistic. It's a really depressing thought to be a 15-year-old and go, what if my fate is already sealed? You know, what if my nurture is so bad I'll never get to know my real nature? If happiness was never taught in my home, is it a learnable skill? I didn't want to think my life was over, so to speak, at 15. And so I started off on this really ambitious mission to learn a new emotional language, I called it. You know, we're each taught an emotional language in our household, and that language may not serve you. It may not make you happy. It may not lead to nourishing choices and nourishing relationships. So where do you go to learn a new emotional language? You know, we can go to college to learn Spanish, but where do we go to learn a new emotional way of relating to ourselves and to the world? And so that's what started me off on this journey. It's what my whole career has been about. It's what all my songs have been about. Everything from Who'll Save Your Soul to Hands to even my new music is still pondering this. And to me, nothing is funner than learning how to be happy and helping other people learn how to be happy. And so that's what I've dedicated myself to through everything that I do. We formed a nonprofit foundation called Inspiring Children. It was founded about 18 years ago, and we help at-risk youth that are struggling with the same question. If my nurture isn't great, how do I get happy? And if you don't have access to traditional support systems like a family, like maybe therapists, is there hope? The answer is yes. And I started developing exercises that actually did rewire me thanks to neuroplasticity. It's finding practicable things that replace old habits and make new habits, basically. And this little curriculum, I wanted to see if it worked for other kids besides me. And it does. We do it with these kids in our foundation. And Aphrah here is one of the youth from the foundation. She's been in our foundation, was in our foundation for maybe 10 to 12 years. I remember when Aphrah first came, all of our kids have to learn to talk from their heart. So everybody shares. Because one of the things I find in common with sadness, depression, negative thoughts is it all makes us want to isolate. And it's painful. You have to realize humans are a carbon-based molecule. Carbon is really unique because it's built to bond to almost every other molecule. It's a really touchy atom. And so we're built to connect, literally. We are built to connect. And when we don't connect, we suffer. Well, when you have somebody like, you know, with my background, connection hurt. So I isolated as a self-defense mechanism. It makes sense. But after a while, that disconnection ends up not saving us. It ends up hurting us. And so one of the things we do in the foundation is a lot of connection. And a lot of that is sitting around the table every morning and doing a check-in and saying how you're doing. And every child stands and they do an honest, real check-in. And it gets real. It's amazing, like the vulnerability our kids learn. And I remember Aphrah was our only kid that didn't say anything. We couldn't get poor Aphrah to say anything. You froze. And Aphrah, I actually really relate to you on that because I did the same thing when I was 16. I was at a powwow of all things in Alaska, and they hand a talking stick around, and it came to me, and I stood, and they waited a half hour. I didn't say a thing. And it was a huge life path for me of learning how to speak from my heart. So I wanted you to share a little bit about yourself, how you got into the foundation, and a little bit of background.
So yeah, I'm Aphrah. I got into the foundation through actually tennis, which I feel like we have less and less people getting in through that now. But I was playing tennis and at the tennis academy that the foundation partners with, and I met Ryan, and that's how I got involved with the foundation. And I definitely wasn't someone who, I was very closed off. My family is very closed off in general, and that was something, it took me a long time. I was really good. We do a lot of learning by doing and entrepreneurial skills, and the foundation and hard work was ingrained in me, and I was really good at getting the job done and being a self-starter, and I was good in that area. But the part that really matters, where you're getting the psychology for life that the foundation offers, and being open and vulnerable and going into that, was something that I didn't do. Really, I did it a little bit here and there when my emotions would start to overwhelm me so much that I just had no option. But for the most part, I was always pushing things down and numbing myself. And then when I was in college, after my freshman year, that's when I really made that decision. I was like, I have to be open, or I'm going to go down a path that isn't going to be healthy, and I don't want to go down.
As a young adult, you know, when I went out into the world, I actually, I was working a job answering phones at a computer warehouse, and a boss propositioned me. And when I wouldn't have sex with him, he wouldn't give me my paycheck, and I ended up homeless. I started living in my car, and then my car got stolen. And I was stealing a lot. I was having panic attacks a lot. And that for me was really this time in my life where I was like, I'm either going to die or I'm going to figure this out. I don't want to kill myself. So that means I have to come up with something that I'm going to try different today than I did yesterday. And if that doesn't work, I'm going to try something else. You know, when you're really struggling with sad thoughts, you think it's forever. You know, the permanence is something that really, really gets people. I remember sitting in Alaska. I grew up on a ranch, and the tides in Alaska are big. They go way out and come way back in. And I was really sad that day, and feeling like this feeling was forever. And I saw the tide go in and out, and I thought, nothing is permanent. Literally nothing in nature. What on earth makes me think I would be the only thing outside of nature that would have a permanent state of being? Can you talk a little bit about your young adult experience struggling with self-doubtful thoughts? Have you ever struggled with depression, and some of the tools you learned to cope with that?
Yeah, so I think that something when I was in high school, I always, so when I was younger, I kind of started this non-negotiables list. And when I was younger, and unintentionally, I recently named it a non-negotiables list, but it was always things to me that just weren't an option. And when I was younger, my mom's best friend's dad committed suicide. And I saw what it did to all the people around, and that really hit me. It really hit me in my heart, and I just knew, I was like, okay, no matter how I'm feeling, no matter how much I want to, how much the thoughts are coming, how large the urges are, I'm never going to do that. That's just a non-negotiable. And then slowly I would add things to that list. So when I was in high school, I don't know if anyone else relates to this, but I had this ability to just like compartmentalize or push down my emotions and not feel them. But eventually they become so overwhelming, I had to feel them, but I didn't understand it. I didn't understand what I was feeling. It felt like too much. I didn't know how to express it because no one around me was expressing themselves. So then I turned to self-harming and cutting. And because that made sense to me. It was like this physical pain rather than this internal pain that I didn't understand. And it felt like I could understand this. And then I realized after about 6 months, I was like, this is going to get unhealthy. This isn't right. This isn't how I should handle this. And I added it to my non-negotiables list. And then that happened again in college. A lot of people in my family are alcoholics, and that's how they deal when they become overwhelmed with emotion. And in college for a semester, whenever I didn't drink a lot, but the only times I did was when I was feeling overcome with emotion, and I couldn't temper it down anymore. I couldn't push it down anymore. I couldn't ignore it. And so after that semester, and then after my freshman year is when I decided to start talking to people and being open and kind of look at my emotions. But I added that to my non-negotiables list. So throughout my life, I always tried to learn from other people, but I always kept adding to this non-negotiable list. And I think that's really saved me, and something that I always decided, because I would say I have a very addictive personality with whatever it is. Even reading, if I open a book, I have to be careful, because I'll sit there and read the whole book until like 5 a.m. And I know it sounds silly, but it's kind of a metaphor for my life and how I attack things. And so for me, it's really been being aware that I do these things and I will be impulsive. And when I'm in an emotional state, I always make a decision. I'm never going to make a decision when I'm in that state. I always have to wait until I've calmed down, until my nervous system's calmed down, until my thoughts aren't going haywire. And I always wait. So no matter how much I'm getting thoughts to self-harm, to drink, to do whatever it is to take away the pain that I'm feeling in that moment, I always have to wait. And that's really saved me from making a lot of decisions that I know would change the trajectory of my life. And I think it's really saved me from going down bad paths and doing things that I would later regret. And so that's been really powerful.
That's a good one. That's a really good one.
I don't know if I actually answered the question, but
you did. No, and you're giving really solid advice. You know, it's so easy with mental health to get into philosophical discussions, and meditation's important, but meditation won't change your life. Actions change our lives. And so we have to find a way from taking philosophy into actionable steps we can practice and do every day. When we do something different, we feel different and our lives change. So that's the thing I love the most about the foundation and the kinds of tools that you're talking about. They're these exact, like, make a list of non-negotiables, keep adding to them. I wanted to let everybody know, I think we're kind of just well into the discussion now. I really want to thank Aphrah especially for joining today, because Aphrah and I, how long have we worked together, by the way? So Aphrah, just for a little bit of background, actually works for me now. She is not in the foundation anymore. Kick-ass, amazing college student, and then decided to help me run the wellness part of my business, because nobody knows it better than you. And you're really behind the scenes. You're a shy person. I don't think you're somebody who would normally want to do something like this Instagram live, but you're here for a really specific reason. Your brother, you found it on Thursday, committed suicide in Florida, and you wanted to come on to talk about it because it's something people don't talk about. You don't get to see people going through the process as it happens. And with suicide up, 60 to 70%, many people are dealing with this. So would you share what happened with your brother and maybe why you're compelled to talk?
Yeah, so when you guys suggested doing this, my initial reaction was, I don't get in front of the camera. But I also do think that through this journey, there is a lot I want. My reason I love what we do is because we are creating change and we are helping people. And if I want his passing to help someone, and that's why I wanted to do this. And he'd really been struggling. He's a veteran, and he'd been in the Marines for about 20 years when he got out about 3 years ago. And he had never dealt with the trauma he'd experienced, and he was he's the product of the same environment I came from, and we generationally didn't open up. We didn't know how to deal with our emotions. You could ask me a few years ago even, what are you feeling? And I would just sit there and I wouldn't be able to tell you because I didn't understand what I was feeling. And he was the same way. And we were very similar, but think of someone who is 15 years older than me, had served multiple tours in Iraq and Afghanistan as infantry, as the front lines, and didn't have the tools to deal with that, and didn't know where to turn to either, and didn't know how to. I know we wanted to be his support system and we wanted to be there, but I've been looking through his journals and different things, and he had this deep hatred for himself because he felt like he had done so much wrong in his life and he didn't feel like he could come back from it. And he had been to the VA, and he'd had PTSD for a long time, but they had been looking into traumatic brain injuries, and they had recently told him, they were like, we want to do more testing, but you have a traumatic brain injury, mild to moderate, and we want to do more testing. And they sent him home, and they didn't give him tools. His case, no one had the tools to give him, and he was living on a boat in Florida with his girlfriend, and his girlfriend didn't have the tools to help him, and she was the only one he would talk to in that moment and who he would turn to. And I know that I saw this list he'd wrote, and it was in this book, and he'd been trying. He was going to the VA for the first time. He was meditating. He was looking at self-help books. He was reading this book about how to be kinder. And he was writing in these journals that prompted him, and it says, who do you need to forgive? And the first person he wrote was myself.
Oh,
and
makes me cry.
Yeah. And he actually, something else he'd done is, our father.
You mean himself, just to be clear. He had to forgive himself. Yeah.
Yes, he had to forgive himself. And something he had done this past year, starting on New Year's, is he had stopped drinking. And our father is an alcoholic as well. And something that he had told me, my dad had told me, is that when he used to stop drinking before he went to AA, because he would go through periods, he was a little bit like how I had drank in college. He didn't have to drink all the time, but he would drink to numb himself when he didn't know how to deal with his emotions. So he was a binge drinker. And my brother did the same thing. And he told me before he went to AA, when he would stop drinking, it was so much worse because all of these thoughts that kind of got numbed when he was drinking really attacked him more. And he didn't have any tools to deal with them. So he was just sitting here not drinking, and he was being attacked by all of these things, and he didn't have any tools.
And I want to stop right there really quick. I want you to pick up again, but something, that we really work on, and I know you worked on this tool, is with our kids. If anybody's relating to this watching, not every thought and feeling you have is a fact. And if nobody's ever told you, I want you to hear, not every thought and feeling you have is a fact. Just because you're thinking doesn't make it true. And you can stop. And what we teach our kids to do, what I learned to do, was to stop and write down when I'm in that state of overwhelm. I get it outside of myself and I write it down, and I write all the negative thoughts. I'm ugly, I'm unlovable, I'm never going to figure this out. My thoughts were the same. It was very kind of this predictable chatter. But starting to write it down, get it outside yourself, look at it. I would label it lies. And then I would go and ask myself what the truth is. If I didn't think, one of the things that would always get me was, I don't know what I'm doing, and I would paralyze. The truth was, I would never quit till I could figure it out. That was true. So we're not looking for the truth as an antidote thought, like, you're great. It doesn't really help us. You want to find the real truth about yourself to help to start to antidote that negative talk. And then take your negative list, your lies list, and talk to somebody. Call them and say, I'm shame spiraling. I believe every single one of these things, and I need you to tell me why you love me. And be there for that friend. If you have friends that are struggling, say, I'm that call. I want you to call me when you do that. So I'm sorry. I just want to give somebody practical little tool if they're struggling with that thing we all struggle with your brain going crazy on you, like attacking you.
No, I appreciate, and actually that is something I do all the time still. There's hundreds of notes in my phone where it's just me writing down random thoughts I'm having throughout the day. And so that's definitely something that I find very powerful. And I suggested that his girlfriend do exactly that, because she's feeling a lot of pain and a lot of regret and a lot of overwhelm because she lost a loved one, she lost her home, and so I suggested she did exactly that, and she started doing that.
Yeah, and the thing with self-harming, with drinking, right, when our feelings are intolerable, we have to do something louder and bigger to numb it out. And that can be alcohol, it can be self-harming, it can be any myriad of things. And so how do we deal with overwhelm? When overwhelm paralyzes us and brings us to a standstill, for me, I stop everything I'm doing and I say nothing is important as me experience this moment and not running from it. And I sit down and I make myself breathe, which feels terrible because you are very present with your overwhelm. And I breathe it out one thought at a time. And I say, I can handle 10 breaths of this overwhelm. I can breathe out 10 breaths of this overwhelm. Something I discovered when I was homeless for a year, was that there's only two basic states of being. There's dilated and contracted. That's it. Every single thought, feeling, or action you have leads to one of those two states. So I started keeping a journal, and I would encourage everybody to do this. When you feel relaxed, open, happy, carefree, write down what you were thinking, feeling, doing, and start to keep track. So I had a section of thinking, feeling, and doing under this dilated heading. For dilated, it was connecting to friends, walking in nature, exercising, sleep, eating good, thoughts of joy, gratitude, curiosity made me feel really happy and open. And then when I felt tight and contracted, which was pretty much all the time, frankly, I would write down what was I thinking, feeling, or doing. And so every time I felt like this and I noticed I was holding my breath or whatever, angry, any tight feeling, I would write down thinking, feeling, or doing. So I had a contracted part of my notebook. What was I thinking, feeling, doing? And there's a pattern. You will see the pattern of the things that work for you and the things that do not work for you. Negativity, jealousy, fear. I would write down all those negative thoughts, isolating, not sleeping, not exercising, not eating well. Were all on my contracted list. So here's the exciting part, and where this starts to get really fun, if you can call this fun, which I kind of think it is you cannot be in two states at once. And so if you're in a contracted state, I learned I could hack my way out of it and get into a dilated state by noticing, right? You have to have enough self-awareness to notice when your body's tight. And then look at your list of dilated and pick something and do it. And it's physiological. It's not just emotional. So I chose gratitude. The first time I got this to work for me, I was heading into a panic attack. And that took me 6 months of work to start to notice the signs of a panic attack before it. I usually just would wake up after the panic attack. And I could feel it coming on. I looked at my list. Gratitude always seemed to feel very grounding and open. But I was feeling really sorry for myself because I was homeless and I didn't think I had anything to be grateful for. But I used observation and curiosity, which were on my dilated list that always worked for me and brought me into the present moment. I saw the sunlight filtering through this palm tree and made this lacy pattern on my skin. And it reminded me of all the times being a little girl in Alaska, laying on the meadows and seeing the sun through the trees. And I suddenly was so profoundly grateful I was alive that I just, maybe one more breath was a radical act of defiance. And that I was in the fight and I was here and I was figuring it out. And I suddenly was really grateful to myself. And I've never felt that way. And the next thing I knew, a half hour had passed. I didn't have a panic attack and I was enraptured in this really beautiful moment in the presence. So it's a really, it's a practical tool I think everybody can use to sort of, again, help them navigate ourselves to be responsible for our own emotional states and help us learn how to transition out of one into the other. Because I'm going to say something pretty bold. Dr. Geary will have to argue with me. If we knew when to dilate at the appropriate time, and if we knew when to contract at the appropriate time, not all contraction's bad. We need it, right? Focus is a contracted state. It's good. But if we knew how to dilate appropriately and contract appropriately, we would not have a dependency on drugs. Because what do drugs do? They dilate you, right? When you're tight and you're a volcano of feeling and you drink, it dilates you. If you can't sleep because you're too wound up, you take something that relaxes you so that you can relax enough to sleep. So it's a really interesting thing to think about and just shows you how important dilation and contraction is. But moving on, Aphrah, you were really, really close to your brother. He was one of the closest people to you in your family. What is it like walking through this process? It's still so fresh. Your brother committed suicide last Thursday, for anybody just joining us. How do you deal with, what are the thoughts? I imagine that you know, I think everybody, you'd wonder, could I have done more? You're in mental health. Mm-hmm. What is that like to have your brother struggle with that? Can you walk us through some of these things? Because you texted me, you know, before we started, and the stuff you're talking about is so beautiful. That's helped you really anchor into how you walk through this time without it tanking you.
I think so. When my mom called me on Thursday morning, and that the night before, it was really interesting because, and actually the few days leading up, I had more thoughts than I'd had probably since high school surrounding self-harm, numbing in any way, suicidal ideation, like all of those thoughts. And it was so strong. And it was also the compulsive urge was so strong. And I don't know if, I think you relate to that, but when the urge is just so strong, it's really hard for you to like take a step back and separate from it, because it just, and so when she called me, I answered the phone, and she didn't want to tell me over the phone. So she was like, hey, we need to come to you, or can you come to us? And I was like, I'll come to you guys. But I immediately knew what I didn't know what had happened, but I knew that my brother had passed. Mm. And and then I got there, and I immediately, through all of this, I felt this peace and love. And it's so strong and so powerful. And there is sadness, and I've cried a lot. And this is actually the first time that I've talked about it and not cried. And well, at least a lot. I've shed some tears, but I haven't like bawled. And I just can't, I know that he is with me, and he's still walking this journey with me, and I know that he is at peace, and I'm surrounded by his peace and love. And I also have an amazing team and support system around me. I mean, you've texted me and offered to meditate with me and be with me through this, and Ryan and the foundation and all of my friends who are really family have rallied around me. So yesterday I was I've been letting his friends know, and I feel like it's really wrong to do it over text. So I've been texting them and telling them that I have some news and I'd like them to call me. And 3 people had called me back to back to back. I would get off the phone and another person would call me. And it got to the point where the emotions were so overwhelming, because it almost felt like I was every time I told someone, they were experiencing it for the first time. So I felt like I was experiencing it for the first time. And it was all different reactions. You had the people, and these were all people who knew him well, who had served in Iraq and Afghanistan with him, who were brothers. And I knew that this conversation was for them, and I was able to be there with the peace and love that I really feel like my brother is giving me, and is allowing me to be there for them, and be there for everyone through this, and also he's being there for me. So I think that tapping into that has been really powerful.
Definitely.
And that doesn't mean there's not sadness, but there's this almost beauty to it.
You reached out to your brother a lot. You called him a lot. He didn't always reply back to you. And instead of you feeling rejected, you just knew he was suffering. Mm-hmm. And I think that's a great tip, for people to know. Like, keep reaching out. It doesn't, if they don't reach back out, it's not personal. And to really build compassion, and that helped you not have regrets when he passed, because you knew you listened to your heart. You reached out every time you had gone to see him a year ago, even though it wasn't convenient. You knew it was right in your heart to go. Mm-hmm. There was some other things on here that I just felt really, like you said, you're really glad you're there for your parents, mm-hmm. so that you can help them, and it makes you really kind of realize your self-growth has helped build a foundation for these moments. And the tools that you've built up leading to this, I'd just love to know any more things of like a handbook, because mm-hmm. people watching this have either dealt with a loss, or sadly, we will, the numbers are so high. Almost all of us know somebody, a friend of a friend, that's lost their life or taken their life. And so what little handbook things do you think you could give for self-care tools, for supporting someone else?
Well, I think like you said, that having healed the relationship before has allowed me to experience this in a different way. I know a lot of people around me are struggling right now with a lot of regret, and I didn't always handle the relationship in the best way, and there was a time, especially when I was younger, where I felt like I chose him, and I didn't feel like he was choosing me. And as I worked on myself, so I really felt almost, and for a time, and this is still something to this day, my biggest thought insecurity to this day that I get attacked with the most is probably around relationships. Mm. And him and my dad, I really felt like they didn't choose me when I was younger, and that they almost like this abandonment ish like thought process and habit loop came out. And then as I started to work on myself, I realized I couldn't choose him and he couldn't choose me, but we could choose ourselves. And I started choosing me. And I realized that he didn't get to that point. He didn't get to the point where he chose himself. But he tried and he put in effort. And that is something that I commend him for, because I know not only was he struggling, but on top of it, he had PTSD and he had a traumatic brain injury. And I don't know if anyone here knows about traumatic brain injuries, but it's when he'd been blown up multiple times when he'd been overseas, and your brain, I'm going to actually let Blaise talk about this later, because he'll be able to talk about it much better than I will, but it makes everything harder to deal with when you're having thoughts and when you're having compulsive thoughts. But something that he actually gave me that I still use to this day that I think is a gift, and when I first started communicating and opening up, I did it through music, because I wasn't at a point where you could ask me and I could explain it. I couldn't even write it down because it just felt like chaos. But I could listen to a song and I could relate to the song and I could say, I feel like that. And I could do that. And that was something that was really powerful for me. And he's actually the person who I founded my love for music with, because he would show me songs all the time when I was little. Actually, the first song, it's kind of funny. I played it the other day. The first song he showed me was a Bone Thugs and Harmony. Nice. Was at Crossroads.
That's great.
But that is something, like, if you don't know how to say what you're feeling or you're not sure yet, even to this day, I'll just sometimes, if I'm feeling a certain way and I can't express it right then, I'll just send, I see Ryan's typing 3,000 miles away. That was a song that I used to express myself at one point. But I'll just send a song and be like, this is how I'm feeling right now. And I think that that's an easy way to get started. And then I'll go from that to writing it out. And then after I write it out, I'll be able to talk it out with someone and realizing I don't have to say it perfectly. It can be a jumble, and then I can finally like weave my way back to how I'm actually feeling and get myself to that point. And those
That's
are
a great tool. I don't know why I've never thought of that, but it's I think it's why I wrote songs, was to be like, what is happening? But I love the idea that if we don't have the emotional language yet to even identify, you know, I know that feeling where it's like, I don't even know what I'm thinking. Like, it's too much. I love the idea of finding a song and going, okay, that's it. That sums it up. What is that? It's a great, great tip. This is Dr. Blaise of Inspiring. He's the head of McLean. I'm so sorry. I get the name a little confused.
McLean, yeah, 3 East. It's a program essentially does exactly what you guys are saying. I mean, like, I don't actually think that you need me here. You know, you guys are just speaking the truth. Just absolutely. I want to hire you both. Well, I actually just want to hang out with you both because you're just so brilliant. And it's just like everything that you've been saying. First of all, Aphrah, and but yeah, no, lots of truth there. People like, I mean, honestly, you don't have to be at Harvard to hear this truth, because this is it's actually pretty ancient wisdom. You know, people have known this for a very long time. We've made this much more complicated than we need to. You know, the one tiny little tweak, I would say, is like, so the people in the suicide community have moved away from committed suicide to died by suicide. Just, you know, like people have died from cancer, died from something. So it's moving away from the stigmatizing of suicide. But other than that, I mean, oh my gosh, you know, like everything that you've said just resonates so much. And it's really a lot of the work that we do is very, very similar. I wrote a prescription here that this is my prescription for you all, and it's Jewel and I signed it, so it's like now a legal document. You got to meditate, sleep, drink lots of water. I think I can add listen to music. By the way, if you go to your insurance company and you ask for this, you don't have to get prior approval. You just do it on your own, you know.
Curate your thoughts. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I just, in case people don't know, you're a psychologist. You run psychiatrist. I apologize. Don't let a dyslexic do any introductions without it being written down. And you want to tell people about DBT and the particular type of work. You know, your institute there at Harvard has one of the best success rates in helping people with all types of mental health ailments. And you are really famous in my eyes, especially for incorporating mindfulness and helping not just sort of pathologize people's illnesses, but give them these tools that help them from the inside out, sort of form and shape their own opinions and reality. Do you want to tell us a little bit about your work in DBT and sort of?
Sure, yeah. So one of the things, I mean, similar to what you guys have been talking about, is our approach to mental health. I mean, I think that sadly our society has sort of divided people, you know, in many, many different categories. But one of the ways in which it does so is like those with mental health and those without. And I think there's a dehumanizing of people who struggle with depression, anxiety, panic, and all sorts of things. And I mean, it can lead people to a tremendous amount of hopelessness. And one of the groups that I was particularly interested in is what Aphrah was talking about, people who struggled with suicidality and self-injury. So our treatment for people who are self-injuring and who are suicidal uses 4 main skill sets. First and foremost, meditation, mindfulness. It teaches emotion regulation skills, because we tell people to calm down, but we don't tell them how to calm down. It's like, you got to calm down. Well, you first, it's like, don't tell me what to do if you don't teach me what to do. So teach them emotion regulation skills, distress tolerance skills, which is tolerating very, very difficult moments when there's nothing else to do, because often what we do is we escape from them. But those difficult moments can actually help us grow if they're not too difficult. But if they're very difficult, then how do you tolerate them? And then the other thing is interpersonal effectiveness skills, because often what we want is very reasonable, but how we ask for it or how we maintain our own self-respect is something that is not something that we can do very well. And so we become doormats to people, or doormats to ourselves. Just how do we, now for people who can do this, they take it for granted. They just know how to do it. But for those of us who don't know how to do it, we can learn. And so we use those things first and foremost, and then we move on to other technologies if we need to. Yeah, so I remember when we first met, it was just like, wow, you guys are already doing exactly the same thing that we're doing. So you don't need the PhDs and the MDs. I'm giving you both honorary degrees. You're awesome.
One of the things that I really love about your approach is rehabilitation, right? I needed to rehabilitate my entire emotional way of looking at the world. It means re-educating. We have teeth and we're taught to floss. That is not shameful. If I say I flossed my teeth this morning, nobody goes, oh, you had to floss your teeth. We have a brain. And so I have no idea why there's a stigma around how to have mental health. And the thing I find more frustrating, and I was outraged as a young child in middle school, was why on earth am I not taught what to do with feelings? Because I have a brain that's locked in a dark box that uses these nerve endings to see, and it relates to the world through feelings. That is how our brain experiences the world. It's these impulses. So if we're not taught how to have emotions, if we're not taught what to do with our thoughts, that we get to curate them, we get to decide, am I going to consume this thought? Is this a healthy thought? The same way we say, am I going to consume this calorie? Is this a healthy calorie? It's so practical and so important to everybody's life. And I find it kind of interesting, just philosophically, that, we used to all come from villages. We lived much smaller and in villages. And pain's part of life. Just none of us, life is temporal, which means life is full of loss, which means life holds hands with pain, right? Love and pain hold hands. And so that's not bad. And yet we spend most of our life trying to avoid pain, because somewhere between the village and the urban environment, we quit being taught what to do with pain. And, something I tell all of our kids when they come in the foundation is all of our hearts are destined to be broken. How your heart or my heart or your heart will be broken is very unique, but it's what we do with the pieces that make us extraordinary. And the more excited we can get about leaning into, okay, my job isn't to avoid pain. I mean, we should be making better decisions and less painful decisions. I've made plenty of painful decisions, almost as an addiction. But beyond that, it isn't our job to just avoid pain. It's our job to figure out, what kind of person am I going to build out of this? Your book is so beautiful in helping put this in people's hands. One of my frustrations is I love therapy, but I don't find a lot of people getting the results they want out of therapy. They talk, which always makes anybody feel better. I really do believe in that. I mean, it's huge. But your life should change. You should be seeing your life get better, or else it's not maybe the right therapist or the right modality. And so I love your book, DBT for Dummies, because it starts to put this in your own hands. Can people use your book, with or without therapy? How would you describe it to people?
Yeah, I totally. When I first got into psychiatry, I was going to do the kind of therapy where you just talk, which, to your point, Jewel, it can be useful for someone just to sort of talk something out. But you know what? If I don't know how to ride a bicycle, you can't talk me into riding a bicycle. You've got to stick me on a bicycle, be alongside me, be my coach, show me what I'm doing right and what I'm doing wrong. So you know, when we put all these, our therapy sounds complicated because part of it is the mysticism of mindfulness, which can be very beautiful if you dive deeply into it. But we don't have to make it too complicated. You know, the presence of just like being is also very cool. So because it can sound like complicated, we decided to just write it in such a way that it would be very accessible to anyone. And so I would say for the vast majority of people, because what you and Aphrah were saying is, you know, we aren't taught these things early on. So this book teaches these things for people who aren't struggling too much. I think that when it gets to the point of severe suicidality or other mental health illnesses where you do need to have experts kind of more involved, you know, sure. But I think for many people who are struggling a little bit, a lot of the skills are taught in the book. One thing which I think is, you know, even if you go to an expert, because if you're having an appendix problem or a tonsil problem and you go to your doctor and they don't deal with it, you're going to continue to have that problem. So the thing about it is that a therapist, I mean, often I've had people say, I didn't want to get rid of you because I felt bad for hurting you. And I'm thinking, wait a second, who's the patient here? if I'm not helping you, then I'm not helping you. And so if your therapist isn't helping you deal with the thing that you set as your goal in therapy, then it's time to move on after a certain period of time. And
That's so
being,
important. I want to just stop there because I really
yeah,
want people to hear that, because you know, we come to a therapist because we're already feeling badly about ourselves. Maybe something's wrong with me. Maybe I'm broken. You know, maybe I'll always be this way. That's usually a big drive of going and seeking help. And then God forbid that expert doesn't help. You're going to blame yourself, right? It's kind of a
yeah,
naturally egoic thing of like, holy crap, I was right. It doesn't mean you're right. It just means it might not be the right fit for you. Just like this doctor or that doctor, everybody has a different style. So keep looking. Don't be afraid to move on, to try something else. And just as long as you don't stop, you will get better if you just don't stop and keep trying. For anybody watching, what do you think, what the most important things you want people to take away from this? You know, maybe it's if you're struggling, or how do you tell if a loved one is struggling and the best way to support them? Is there anything kind of pops into your mind of like, you have an audience right now and you really want to get this into their head?
when you're feeling desperately low and hopeless and you don't know what to do and you're feeling very isolated, it's very hard to generate the effort to go and ask for help. So what I'm saying is, if you have somebody in your life who is stuck, you know what? An act of kindness is reaching out and saying hello. Just let them know you're there, because then maybe they can hear and maybe they'll ask for help. So, you know, it's back and forth. So that's just, I mean, that's just one simple thing. But Aphrah, I don't know, like, what about you? Thoughts?
Well, I know that that's something I've really appreciated over the last few days, is that it can be kind of an uncomfortable situation for people in your life when someone you know loses someone and you don't know what to say, you don't know how to be there. But I've had a few people who, one of my friends has just called me every day, and whether or not I pick up the phone or not or talk to them, they just always call to check in. And a lot of people have texted and reached out, but just having people do that, even if you're not ready to talk. And I've been in a place where I've wanted to talk, and it's been really nice to be able to share. And even just sitting here with you guys, it's been nice to talk about this and share and be able to communicate. But there's been points in my life where I haven't been in that state of mind, but it's still nice to have someone reaching out and having that person there showing kindness. I do really agree with that. I also think I saw two questions that I would like if we touched on. One is, I do know that people in this situation and around me have been experiencing anger. And anger in different ways, anger towards the VA, anger towards people in my brother's life, and even I've anger towards my brother. And I know, Dr. Blaise, you've talked about anger, and Jewel, you actually were the first person to tell me this. So when Blaise asked this question, I was able to answer correctly. But anger is a secondary emotion, and
Yeah.
if you could speak to that, but I personally don't have any anger because I know that the people who were around my brother at that point didn't have the tools to help him, including the VA. And the system is broken, and this also, that's why I love that we're in mental health, because I want to help the system. I know you guys both want to help the system, and I would have loved if my brother would have allowed me to help, but he was in a space where he felt like if he talked to me about these things, and I knew they were going on, but if he felt like he were open to me and he let me help him, he would almost taint me, because he felt like he was tainted and there was something wrong with him, and he felt like I was the little sister that he had to protect. And but I don't have anger towards anyone because I know that they didn't have the tools, and I know my brother didn't have the tools, and I also have a lot of empathy for him because our brains work a lot alike and we feel a lot the same, and we both felt a lot. And he was this person who'd been in the military and felt like he had to be this macho man who couldn't show his emotions, on top of our upbringing, which I do want to say that both my parents have changed and have worked on themselves, but that was still there for him. And so I think the fact that I can have empathy and love takes away that anger, because I really think that anger just hurts you. It doesn't hurt the person you're angry at, it only hurts yourself.
Emotions, primary emotions last for 30, 40 seconds. Anything that's lasting longer than that is what we call a secondary emotion. And it's an emotional reaction to an emotion. And then we ruminate, we get stuck in it. You know, so yeah, I mean, the fact that you can love deeply and you can, but the other thing is, it's interesting, listen to your brother's, sadly, your brother's fake news, the lies that he told himself. Mm-hmm. You're his little sister who I'm gonna taint you, and all of these sorts of things. It's just not true. But the other thing is, you're the determiner of your life. If you get tainted, well, you could say, hey, you're tainting me. Mm-hmm. But don't treat people as fragile. Love, I don't want to ever be treated as fragile. Jewel never treats me as fragile. It's the best thing ever. It just says, like, hey, this is what it is. Now I can either say, hey, wait a second, you're pushing too hard, or I can say, wait a second, let me examine that. But it's actually unkind to treat people as fragile. But also for your brother to believe the stories that he believed inside his head, they weren't helpful to him. Poor guy. Yeah.
So go ahead. There was another one.
Oh, I was just going to say, I saw someone saying that we apologize for crying, but we shouldn't. We should lean into it. And Ryan always says, the more you cry, the more you smile. And I've definitely had a lot of deep cries over the last few days. And I do really believe that crying is something that you should dive into and is important to heal.
That is so true. Ryan, we keep mentioning him. He runs our foundation and runs a lot of our mental health initiatives. And you've never seen a man just more freely and more openly get moved to tears and sob. Like, how often is it in meetings that one of us has a deep cry? And it's nice. None of us try to save each other from crying. When our kids, somebody in the foundation office cries, we don't try and save them. We just let them have a good deep sob. And again, that's dilating. That's letting your system open so you can move emotional energy through your body, and get it up and out so it doesn't stagnate and play. It also comes like a plaque, right? When I don't let my feelings move through me. I guess a few little tips just for people as we kind of wrap up. Practice reaching out to those suffering. Have a little emergency card list if you're suffering, of people you reach out to. I find it really helps to have an agreement and say, hey, you're on my top 3 list. If I'm struggling, I'm going to call you. Would you please make sure you pick up the phone if I call you? Practice improving your side of strained relationships. My dad and I's relationship healed, not necessarily because we worked on it. It's because I worked on myself, and my side of my relationship was me. And I took 100% accountability for my own self growth. And my relationship proved as a side effect, but it's also because my dad did the work and he did his half. Open up and call, text, or write a letter expressing how you feel. Aphrah, I know this is something you do a lot. You write a lot of letters just expressing how you feel. My dad does it. He sends letters all the time. And they're beautiful. Not everybody responds back, but it's a beautiful practice. Meditate, get curious about your inner life, your inner guide, and your inner emotions. Practice not taking offense. You know, if you reach out to somebody and they don't reach out back, just focus on the parts of life and the relationship that you can control. Take advantage of healing moments. Man, when you get a good deep sob, I have a 9-year-old son, and I can see sometimes he really needs an emotional release, and he's looking for something to get it ignited. And sometimes he'll just cry over like something that you would think is silly, like frustrated over tying his shoe. He's the biggest sob, and I know it's because he had all these pent up feelings about something else. And finally, this was the spark. So if you get a chance to have a good deep sob, you roll with it. Stop everything you're doing and just go for it. Let's see, open yourself up to the moment and connecting to those that you can't see in front of you. You know, even if they're far away, this is something we can practice. I've even done it with friends that have passed. I don't know if anybody else does that, but I'll stop and take a moment to really connect with my friend, you know, and it feels good. I don't know whether it's real or not real, but it feels real and it feels good. And I feel like I learn something every time. This is a really weird thing, but this is one of my things. I make decisions. You're going to laugh, Blaise, as if I'm on my deathbed. And when it's an important decision, I pretend I'm on my deathbed and I'm looking back at my life. And is this a decision I cared about? Is this a relationship I cared about? Is this a relationship or a decision that I'm going to go, you fought for yourself in your heart, or no, you sold yourself out? And for some reason, that perspective works really good for me. You can go to resources. I have a mental health website. It's jewelneverbroken.com. We have a wellness festival called the wellnessexperience.com. And Blaise's book, which we mentioned earlier, DBT for Dummies, it just came out and it's awesome. It's practical and usable and easy to understand. And super grateful that you wrote that and are offering it out to the world. Any other wrapping up thoughts, both of you?
You know what? The only thing I would say is it's like you might not know just how lovable you are, each one of you. And I know that we get taught not to love ourselves or to doubt that, but God, you are so lovable. Every single one of you out there, even when you don't believe it. Like, you got to start believing that. I mean, if it's even if you think it's fake news, it's like the best fake news ever. Like the rest of it, you're not hateable, but just love. And so that's all. You got to practice. You really do have to practice. If I could get you all practicing one thing, is to really deeply see yourself as wonderful. People say, no, I can't, I'm unique. But let me just tell you, you're unique just like everybody else. So so that's all. All right. And I love you guys so much, both of you, and the foundation, like best foundation. If everybody, like, I'm just going to do one big promotion thing. Like, if anybody has, like, you want to think about, like, where's the best $5 I'll ever spend, give it to the Never Broken Foundation. Honestly, like, okay, promo. You guys didn't, I'm just saying that. All right.
Thank you. And I'll promo if anyone wants to learn more, or if you wanted to get in touch, volunteer, or if you want to share your story or any of those things, you can go to our website. It's inspiringchildren.org. They also have been writing in the chat, so you could just click on their name. It's at Inspiring Children. But thank you guys for listening and being here and allowing me to share, and also sharing.
Bye.
Bye, guys.